this moment now to silence your cell phones. Thank you.
Hello, good evening, and welcome. I'm Susan Engel, the executive producer of 9to-Y Talks. Tonight, we could not be more proud to partner with Dartmouth College Institute for Cross-Disciplinary Engagement to bring you this very special program. ICE brings together sciences and humanities and builds a global community of thinkers who are illuminating the path to mutual understanding. I want to thank Templeton Foundation for their generous support of ICE and this ongoing series of conversations. Our topic this evening is the nature of faith with novelist and philosopher Rebecca Goldstein and astrophysicist and acclaimed novelist Alan Lightman. After our moderated discussion, we hope you will join us for a more in-depth question and answer workshop directly following our program in our adjacent lounge. I also want to encourage you to please fill out the survey you have been handed on your way out. I'm now delighted to introduce our moderator and director of ICE. Marcelo Gleiser is the Appleton Professor of Natural Philosophy and Professor of Physics and Astronomy at Dartmouth College. The author of more than 100 articles and dozens of essays in print and digital form, Marcelo's research focuses on the questions of origins. Marcelo is a fellow of the American Physical Society and a recipient of the Presidential Faculty Fellows Award from the White House and the National Science Foundation. Marcelo engages tirelessly with the general public as a voice for science. In his 5 books, essays, and op-eds, and as co-founder and contributor of NPR's blog 13.7, Cosmos and Culture, he distinguishes himself as a scientist humanist, presenting science within a broad cultural, historic, and philosophical context. Before Professor Gleiser joins us, I invite you to watch this short video about ICE. Thank you.
The world is a complex place, a network of flowing information and changing patterns, where forces known and unknown generate the most sublime beauty and the most terrifying destruction. The world inspires wonder and doubt, and we humans try to make sense of it all, creating stories, theories, symphonies, and poems. I am Marcelo Gleiser, Director of the Institute for Cross-Disciplinary Engagement at Dartmouth, or ICE. On behalf of all of us at ICE and our partners, I invite you to be a part of our institute, to be a part of this very essential conversation. What is the nature of reality? What is the future of humanity? Will machines think? Will and should we become immortal? Is there free will? Are we alone in the universe? Can science be a path towards spirituality? ICE was created to address these issues and establish new bridges between different ways of knowing. Our mission is to overcome old bigotries and facilitate a constructive dialogue between intellectuals and the general public, creating a community of citizens concerned with the common good. Engaging experts, promoting public dialogue, and offering open access courses. One thing is certain, the hardest questions ask for different viewpoints, for a cross-disciplinary approach, for intellectual openness. The sciences and the humanities need one another now more than ever, and we need them both. Good evening. I see nothing. I see light, which is okay, but I'm sure you're there because I can at least hear you, which is wonderful. So I'm Marcelo Gleiser. I'm very thankful that you're all here tonight. I think this is going to be a wonderful evening. I have two fabulous thinkers here with us tonight, Alan Lightman and Rebecca Goldstein. Let me tell you a little bit about them and also a little bit about the night that we have ahead. So let me get my glasses so I can see what I'm saying. 1 second, please. It's the microphone. Okay, here goes. We got it. So Rebecca Goldstein is a very acclaimed philosopher and novelist. She is the recipient of numerous prizes for her fiction and scholarship, including a Guggenheim Fellowship, a MacArthur Genius Award. In 2012, she was named a Humanist of the Year by the American Humanist Association. In 2015, she received the National Humanities Medal from President Obama. Good times. She is the author of 10 books, including Plato at the Googleplex, Why Philosophy Won't Go Away, and a wonderful novel called 36 Arguments for the Existence of God, a work of fiction. And this is a wonderful book because it's a novel about God, but at the very end, she has an appendix where she goes through detailed exposition of the so famous 36 arguments for the existence of God and why they are flawed, from a philosophical perspective. So it's very enlightening. Maybe that's not the way to look for God, is not to construct an argument. There may be better ways to do that. And she's now a visiting professor at the New York University as well. Alan Lightman is a physicist and novelist and essayist, the first at MIT to receive dual appointments in the sciences and the humanities. I'm very jealous. He's the author of 5 novels, 2 collections of essays, a book-length narrative poem, and many nonfiction books on science. His novel, Einstein Dreams, was an international bestseller and published in 30 languages. His most recent books are Screening Room, a memoir of the South, one of Washington Post's 2015 Best Books of the Year, and The Accidental Universe. He has a new book coming out this spring, which I had the privilege of reading. It's nice to know the good guys. Searching for Stars on an Island in Maine, which is really a meditation on science and spirituality from a first-person narrative. And I'm sure Alan's going to tell you a little bit about it tonight. And on top of all this, Alan has received the Gold Medal for Humanitarian Service to Cambodia, awarded by the government of Cambodia, based on his Harpswell Foundation, a nonprofit with a mission to equip young women in Southeast Asia with leadership skills and critical thinking skills as well. Both Alan and Rebecca are fellows of the American Academy of Arts and Sciences. So when I thought about the topic for tonight and inviting them both tonight, I thought there was a perfect combination because they embody in their work and in their persona, as you'll see, this idea of bringing together the sciences and the humanities to talk about the big questions, right? So tonight, we're going to talk about the nature of faith, or the relationship between science and religion, right? And one of the points that I would like to make before we start is that at the very core of this conversation between science and religion is that it should be a conversation and not something which is an antagonic, kind of conflict, as so many people have portrayed it. Because really, if you think seriously about science and religion, you're going to find out that at the very core, there is something subjective about both of them, which is really an answer to our anxiety to know the world, to understand how we fit in this big scheme of things, to understand who we are and what is the purpose of our lives. And, religions have been answering or trying to answer this for millennia, and science has been trying to do the same. And in a sense, the 21st century and the way science has progressed now is where you see this kind of confluence of ways of knowing, where questions that were once the province of religion are now scientific questions. For example, the origin of the universe, the origin of life, the nature of consciousness, and the future of humanity, considering ethical decisions that we have to make about artificial intelligence, the growing automation and the workforce. All of these questions are questions that force us to sit together and to consider the contributions that both scientists and humanists have to make to these very fundamental issues that we are all confronting right now. So without much ado, let me introduce and bring over Rebecca and Alan. Please, come in. Thank you.
I really can't see. Thank
So middle. And let me just mention that the way we have structured this is that they will each talk for about 15, 20 minutes or so, and then we'll talk a little bit among ourselves, and then there'll be time for Q&A from you as well. And then, as Susan mentioned, after all this, we will walk out. Apparently, there'll be even cheese and wine, which is great, and we'll be able to sit down for a more in-depth conversation in a smaller group for those of you who decide to stay, okay? So let's see, Alan, you're going to be starting. Thank you for being here, both of you.
Well, I first want to thank Marcelo and the 92nd Street Y for inviting me here. I admire Marcelo's new program at Dartmouth to bring the sciences and humanities together. I've also long admired the thinking and work of Rebecca Goldstein.
Likewise.
So it's a delight to be here. For many years, my wife and I have spent our summers on a small island in Maine, and it's only about 30 acres. There are no ferries or bridges to the island, so everybody has to have their own boat. So my story concerns a particular summer night, very late at night, when I was coming back to the island alone in my boat, and I just had rounded the corner of the island. It was a moonless night and very quiet, and the stars were vibrating in the sky, and I took a chance and turned off the running lights of the boat, and then I turned off the engine, and I just lay down in the boat and looked up at the sky. And looking up at the stars from the ocean on a dark night is a mystical experience. After a few minutes, my world had dissolved into that sky. The boat disappeared, my body disappeared. I felt like I was falling into infinity. I felt an overwhelming connection to the stars, and the vast expanse of time extending from the infinite past before I was born to the infinite future after I would die seemed compressed to a dot. I felt connected not only to the stars, but to all of nature and the cosmos. I felt a merging with something much bigger than myself, some kind of grand unity. And after a while, I sat up and started the engine again, and I didn't really know how long I had been lying there. I've worked as a physicist for many years, and I've always held a purely scientific view of the world. And by that, I mean that the world is material, that it obeys forces and laws, and that everything in the physical world, including humans and stars, will eventually disintegrate and reduce to their component parts. Even at the age of 12 or 13, I was impressed by the logic and the materiality of the world. I had my own homemade laboratory. One of the projects I built was a pendulum by attaching a fishing weight to a string. And I'd read in Popular Science magazine or some similar magazine that the time for the period for the pendulum to make one complete swing was proportional to the square root of the length of the string. And with a stopwatch and a ruler, I verified this magnificent law. logic and pattern, cause and effect. As far as I could tell, everything there was subject to analysis and quantitative tests, and I saw no reason to believe in a supernatural being, and that's still pretty much my view. Yet after my experience in the boat in Maine many years later, I understood the powerful allure of the spiritual world. I understood the allure of the non-material and the ethereal, things that are all encompassing, unchanging, eternal, sacred. And at the same time, perhaps paradoxically, I remain a scientist. I remain committed to the material world. I have a good friend in Cambodia who's a venerated Buddhist monk, and sometimes I talk to him about spiritual and scientific matters. And the Buddhists, as some of you may know, believe in the Four Noble Truths, and they all deal with the cause of suffering and how to relieve that suffering. And my monk friend made it clear to me that Buddhists come to the Four Noble Truths from their direct experience with the world. But there are other things that the Buddhists believe in, such as that the universe has gone through an infinite number of cycles, where their convictions are based exclusively on the words of the Buddha, a human being born with the name of Siddhartha Gautama, also known as the Lokavidu, the knower of worlds. And I thought to myself, how do we know that the Buddha was the knower of worlds? Were Einstein and Darwin both knowers of worlds? The things that we believe about the physical universe and the spiritual universe, how do we come to that knowledge, and on what authority? Science and religion differ profoundly in the ways that truths and beliefs are arrived at. In religion and theology, I think there are two origins for the truths and beliefs. First are the sacred books, like the Bible and the Quran and the Vedas and the Pali Canon. Believers have faith that these books embody the true word of God or other enlightened beings. And if so, the authority of the teachings in those books comes from those beings. The second origin of religious truth and knowledge is more personal, what one might call the transcendent experience. So let me talk briefly about these two kinds of knowledge in religion, and then I'll talk about the kinds of knowledge in science. Quotations from the sacred books are used to declare truths ranging from the origin of the universe to free will to the details of reproductive biology. And still today, many religious thinkers attribute absolute authority and truth to the sacred books, called divine revelation. And here's part of the pronouncement of the Second Vatican Council on Divine Revelation, endorsed by Pope Paul VI, and I quote, "The books of Scripture must be acknowledged as teaching solidly, faithfully, and without error that truth which God wanted put into sacred writings for the sake of salvation." I respect the notions of God and divine beings. However, I insist on one thing. I insist that statements made by such beings, including statements recorded in the sacred books, about the physical world have to be subject to test. In my view, truth of the statements about the physical world cannot be assumed. They must be tested and revised as needed. The spiritual world has its own domain. The physical world is the province of science. In the physical world, laws cannot apply to some phenomena and not to others, or at some times and not to others, and not at other times. It's not okay with me if the principles of aerodynamics work on some of my airplane flights and not others. Most religions take God to have an existence outside of the physical world, beyond time and space. Because science is restricted to the physical world, it can never, therefore, disprove the existence of God. I am impatient with the so-called neo-atheists like Richard Dawkins and Larry Krauss, who challenge the belief in God by using scientific arguments. The neo-atheists are missing the point, in my view. Likewise, we can never prove the existence of God. Belief in God must be based on faith. Let me turn to the transcendent experience. And for me, as a scientist and a humanist, the transcendent experience is the most powerful argument for a spiritual universe. By transcendent experience, I mean the immediate and vital experience of being connected to something larger than ourselves, to feeling some unseen order in the universe. The experience I had looking up at the stars that night in Maine was a transcendent experience, and I imagine that many of you have had similar experiences. The transcendent experience may or may not involve a supreme being. Unlike the received wisdom from the sacred books or from the pronouncements of religious institutions, the transcendent experience is a very personal experience. And the authority of that experience rests in the experience itself. No other person can deny the validity of what you have felt. The feelings cannot be disproved. Most transcendent experiences are unique events that cannot be duplicated in the laboratory. I want to now talk briefly about the kinds of knowledge in science and the way that we arrive at that knowledge. Scientific knowledge is of two types. One is the properties of physical objects, like the size and the mass of a raindrop. The other is the laws of nature. One of the first human beings to formulate a law of nature was Archimedes 2,000 years ago. Here is his law of floating bodies, and I quote, "Any solid lighter than a fluid will, if placed in the fluid, be so far immersed that the weight of the solid will be equal to the weight of the fluid displaced." Well, we can speculate on how Archimedes arrived at his law. At the time, balance scales were available for weighing goods at the market. So Archimedes could have taken an object, weighed it on a balance scale, then put it in a rectangular pan of liquid, measured the height and rise of the liquid, multiply the area of the container by the rise in height, and gotten the volume of liquid displaced, then taken that same volume of liquid, put it in another container, and weighed it. And undoubtedly, he would have done this experiment many times to arrive at his law, and he probably also did it with other liquids besides water, like mercury, to come to the generality of the law. All laws of the physical world are like Archimedes' law. They are precise, they are quantitative, and they apply to a large range of phenomena. Perhaps it's astonishing that nature should obey laws at all. On the other hand, it's possible that nature could not exist without laws, that there would be some fatal contradiction without laws, like 2 + 2 = 4 and 2 + 2 = 3. Certainly, an unlawful universe would be a frightening place to live in. In the last 200 years, we've discovered laws that govern everything from electricity and magnetism to the forces in atoms to the expansion of the universe. From those laws, we've been able to explain in quantitative detail everything from the orbits of planets to the color of the sky to the six-sided symmetry of snowflakes. And we've seen no evidence to suggest that all of the phenomena in nature do not obey laws. Here's a wonderful law of nature that you can verify for yourself when you get home. Take an object, drop it to the floor from a height of 4 feet, and time how long it takes to hit the floor. You'll get about half a second. Then drop it from a height of 8 feet. You'll get about 7/10 of a second. Drop it from a height of 16 feet, and you'll get about 1 second. And after doing this a few more times, you discover the law, the rule, that the time doubles for every quadrupling of the height. This was a rule found by Galileo in 1590. And with this rule, you can now predict how long it will take to drop any object, how long it will take it to hit the floor from any height. You have discovered firsthand the lawfulness of the physical world. The law of the swinging pendulum that I found when I was 12 or 13, I didn't believe it was true because I had read about it in Science and Popular Science magazine. I didn't believe it was true because I wanted it to be true or because the famous Galileo had said it was true. I believed it because it worked. It evidently represented some fundamental property of nature. Let me sketch the methods and the manner of science. Galileo's law of falling bodies was found to be a special case of Newton's laws of motion and gravity. Newton discovered his law by analyzing the orbits of planets around the sun. For 2 centuries, Newton's law worked beautifully. And then in the 19th century, very precise measurements with new telescopes showed that the orbit of the planet Mercury could not be completely explained in terms of Newton's law. There was a slight discrepancy, very, very slight, just 1/100th of 1 angular degree every century. It was off. However, Newton's law was so precise and the measurements were so careful that some scientists were worried. And then in 1915, Albert Einstein came up with a new theory of gravity that explained the orbit of Mercury and predicted many other phenomena, such as the existence of gravitational waves. And here's the main point. We know that even Einstein's theory of gravity, as subtle and as accurate as it is, will need revision. All the laws of nature discovered by scientists are considered provisional. They're considered to be approximations to deeper laws. They're constantly being revised as new experimental data comes in or there are new ideas that are tested. In fact, what we call laws of nature should really be called approximate laws of nature, because even if there are final and perfect laws of nature, which many scientists believe in, at any one time, we know only approximations to those laws. It's in the process of the testing and revision that we see the strongest differences between the methods and beliefs of science and religion. As I've said, everything that we know in the physical world, the province of science, is subject to revision. Everything must be tested and proved. The knowledge of religion coming from either the sacred books or from the personal transcendent experience is not subject to revision. It is not an approximation. I want to end my comments by saying that there is something the scientists believe in that cannot be proved. I call it the central doctrine of science, which says that all of the phenomena of nature in the physical world are subject to laws, and those laws hold true everywhere and at every time. This must be accepted as a matter of faith, this central doctrine, because no matter how logical and lawful the world has been up to now, we can't be certain that tomorrow there might not be an experiment that is fundamentally unlawful. something that is fundamentally unexplainable. When it was found that the orbit of Mercury did not quite follow the prediction of Newton's theory, scientists did not abandon their faith in the central doctrine. They did not attribute the discrepancy to some miracle or to the intervention of a whimsical God. Instead, they recognized a problem that required a more advanced understanding. In fact, I can't imagine any event in the physical universe that would cause scientists to label the event a miracle, unexplainable by science. Even if Rebecca's chair suddenly started floating in the air, I would look for a magnetic levitator underneath it, or I would try to postulate some new force that was not yet known by science, but a lawful force, not a supernatural force. In sum, I would argue that despite the big differences in science and religion and the way that knowledge is obtained and revised, that both share a degree of faith, a belief and commitment to the unprovable. Science experimentally tests and proves everything that it knows and believes about particular phenomena, but it cannot do so with the fundamental belief, the central doctrine. The central doctrine must be simply accepted. I think science and religion are the two greatest forces that have shaped human civilization, and I think both of them reflect something that is deeply human in us. Certainly, they are both here to stay. So let the conversation continue. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, it's a great pleasure to be here and to be in conversation once again with Marcelo and with Alan. I wasn't going to speak at all personally, but I'm so inspired by your sharing that personal story that I will start on a personal note. I grew up very religious, and I know truly what it's like to believe with perfect faith, and which has fallen away. So I don't have faith in faith anymore, but I feel like I do know it from the inside. And the world was diminished in some ways. It was also richer in some ways when I lost the faith in which I was raised. But the reason I think that perhaps it's relevant to today's subject is it was partly science that began my move away from the perfect faith in which I was raised and which I had enjoyed. It actually started when I was very young. We were very strict Sabbath observers, and we really weren't allowed to do much of anything on the Sabbath except for read. And that was okay because we were all big readers. I grew up very poor. We didn't have any books in the house, but my father was a refugee from Poland. Every Friday before sundown, we were taken to the library, and my parents were as religiously rigorous as they were. They felt that if a book was in the library, it couldn't be bad for me. Little did they know. And I think I've told this story to Alan. I think I've shared this story with Alan. One Friday afternoon, I took out a book that was called Our Friend the Atom, and it just blew my little mind because I learned from this book that, or at least what the book was telling me, was that the world was very, very different from the way that it seemed in experience, that it was composed of all these invisible little particles always moving around, and even solid things had lots of empty space in them, and the atoms were colorless and odorless, and so this idea that somehow we could get out of our experience and discover certain things existing out there that weren't represented in our experience. That's not, of course, I was 7 or 8. That's not the way not the language that I put these thoughts to myself. But it was just rocked my little world, and I thought, how do they know this? How do they get outside experience about the way how things seem colored and odored and solid and sane still? How do they know this? And I learned that there were these people, physicists, and somehow they did this. They got outside their experience. That's the way it was presented. And I thought, I was not brought up to have any intellectual ambitions of my own, but I thought, I formed this ambition. Someday I'm going to meet a scientist. Somehow I'm going to arrange to meet a scientist, and then, well, look at me, 2 scientists, right? And I'm going to ask them, how do you do it? How do you get outside of experience and discover what really is? Well, I was lucky, and I did, through various efforts, get to college, and I majored in physics, of course, and I was a happy physics student, loved relativity theory, answered everything that I wanted from studying physics. But then I took a course in quantum mechanics. Quantum mechanics is a very weird theory, and there are many interpretations of quantum mechanics, meaning that there are many alternative descriptions of the way the world might possibly be in order to accommodate this theory. And I was in the class of a professor who was a doctrinaire advocate of what we call the Copenhagen interpretation. We call it the Copenhagen interpretation because it was the interpretation of Niels Bohr, who came from Copenhagen. And this, at least as it came through then by my professor, it was that what basically he would tell me when I would come to him and say, but tell me what the world is like. What is quantum mechanics telling me that the world is like? That's why I want to study physics. I want to know what's out there. He would say, shut up and calculate, which is, not in so many words, but that's what Richard Feynman had famously said, and he would give me his version of shut up and calculate. Well, that's not why I had struggled so hard to get to college and to be able to, against the program that had been laid out for me, to do something like study physics. I kept going to my professor and bothering him, and finally he said to me, why don't you go speak to the philosophers? They ask these sort of meaningless questions. And that's how and I did. I was at Barnard, but I was taking all my physics courses at Columbia University, and I went to the philosophy hall and I asked around, and I was told to go speak to Sidney Morgenbesser, who was a very wonderful person to have spoken to, and I spoke, and he didn't tell me to shut up. He told me these were good questions, and have you thought of this question? Because that's one question led to another, and you can't read the books of Sidney Morgenbesser because he believed in dialogue, just like Socrates, and he had the same publishing record as Socrates, which is the null set, nothing, right? He spoke, and he produced many generations of philosophy students. Anyway, and he said to me at a certain point, I think you're interested in philosophy of science. And I said, okay, I think I am, because at least you answer my questions. So I want to put, I mean, I very much agree with what Alan has so far said, but I want to put science and religion in a broader context. I think Alan would agree with this. I think he, in some sense, said it. But I think religion and science and philosophy as well belong to what it is that make us human. I think it's really distinctive of our species that we want to get our bearings in the widest sense possible. That's really distinctively human. We want to know, first of all, where we are. I mean, we find ourselves in this universe, and we want to know where are we? What kind of universe is it? What is reality? What is it made of? How is it ontologically furnished? You know, this word ontological, that has to do, it comes from the Greek ontos, for being. But all these questions about reality, about where we are. And we want to know what we are. Are we part of the material world? I mean, there's a lot of research now among psychologists that seem to show that children have an inclination to not believe that they are their bodies. They're kind of naturally Cartesian dualists. There's their body, and then there's them. And I remember actually when one of my daughters was very young, and she was a bit of a klutz. You couldn't get through a meal. Well, like her mom, she talked with her hands, so you couldn't get through a meal without her knocking over her milk or her juice or, you know, her grape juice. That was always a disaster. And I remember, you know, one day she did this, knocked over something, and she said, "Look at what my body did." She's about 4 years old, and I said, "Yeah, Al, you didn't do that?" She said, "No, look at what my body did." You know, and she meant she had no intention. It wasn't her agency, but there was already, you know, this kind of dualism that she was something that was agency, that was decided to do things, that intended to do things, and her body just, you know, sometimes did what she wanted and sometimes it didn't. So we want to know, and from an early age, I think, it's very, very natural to us, where we are, what we are, and then we want to know, those of us who have the leisure, the privilege to worry about these things, what we're supposed to be doing, what we're supposed to, given what we are, what's in store for us, and what are we supposed to be doing with this life that we've been given. We're also animals who are very aware that we're going to die, and we wonder a great deal about that as well. So we want to get, in the broadest sense, our bearings. And I think that these questions of trying to get our bearings that come very naturally to us, that are distinctively human, basically boil down to two questions: what is and what matters? What exists ontologically? How is the universe furnished? What are we? And what matters? What are we supposed to do with the privilege of life that we've been given? What kinds of lives are we? What ought to matter to us? And that question of what matters is, I think, most urgently asked in the first person. We want to know whether we matter, whether our lives matter. The philosopher Bernard Williams, who died a few years ago, a very good British philosopher, had said that all of these sorts of ethical questions, ultimately questions about mattering, they're all really first personal. We're really asking about our own lives, and that's where it begins. Now, I think that when it comes to the questions of what is, science is our most reliable approach. I don't use the word method. I think the scientific method is something of a myth. Science uses so many cognitive skills, so many different kinds of activities, and including aesthetic intuitions, including metaphysical intuitions, but math and modeling and observation. But the thing that makes science science is that Alan had used the word testing. I mean, the way I like to think of it is that science prods reality to answer us back if we're getting it wrong. That we're always are putting it to the test. Is this the way it seems? Some of our deepest intuitions have been overturned because of science prodding reality to answer us back. So, for example, you know that simultaneity is absolute, that it doesn't matter from what frame of reference you measure to events to see whether they're simultaneous, that the time just flows on an even way, and it doesn't matter how you measure events. Two events are going to be simultaneous. And of course, it was Einstein's theory that put that to the test. And it turns out that's not the case. And in fact, space-time, are interwoven with each other. The philosopher Kant had thought that space and time and causality, that the way we think about them is such a given that they are imposed. They're categories of the mind. Because he was a German, he made up lots of fancy terminology, and he called it 1 minute?
Okay, 2.
Oh my God, I haven't even gotten to religion. Anyway, okay, I'll just say that science is, I think, our best way of establishing what is, because it enlists reality as a collaborator. Science is silent about this question of what matters, and it's silent about the question of whether we matter in the universe. Religion is very loquacious on this subject. That is, right, when I was a little child, there was this kind of confection I wanted to eat very much, Hostess Twinkie. It looked delicious, right? All my friends were eating this thing, but it didn't have the proper rabbinical sign on it, and I couldn't eat it, and I wanted to so much. But I felt, that if I were to bite into a Hostess Twinkie, the Lord of the hosts would pay attention. He would know, and he would disapprove. It was very frightening, but I never for a moment doubted that I mattered, that I cosmically mattered, right? That the universe was shot through with intentionality, that I had been created, with a certain purpose, and that the way I behaved was going to make a difference, right? I don't know. So to me, what religion is one of the most powerful ways. It's not the only way. There are secular ways of doing it, but it is one of the most powerful ways, the Abrahamic religion in particular, of validating our sense that we matter very much. We certainly matter to ourselves, and it is a way of validating that cosmically in the grandest way possible. It doesn't make it true, but it makes it very, very powerful. And I think that that is, one of the reasons that religion has the staying power that it does. Just very, very quickly, when I did come out as an unbeliever, I got many, many letters from people. And a lot of them would say things like, what gets you out of bed in the morning? Why do you care to live? And that really brought home to me that sense of how much religion does answer to what I call our will to matter. I think what we are is matter that longs to matter, and that faith is irradiated by this will to matter. There are other ways of doing it, and perhaps we can talk about that. But that, to me, is one of the differences between science and religion. Boy, time really is relative. When I'm talking,
it's all. What happened? Relative.
Time just stops.
Can I ask you a couple of questions, just comments, and then if you have questions to one another, that's good. So I just want to make a comment that, so in the play Arcadia by Tom Stoppard, he says something which I think is wonderful, and it goes against this idea of religion as being something that makes us matter, which he says is wanting to know that makes us matter. And I think that's wonderful, because it's really about this desire we have to know that really kind of makes us transcend the everyday sameness of life.
Yeah. No, surely, I was not saying that this is the thing that makes us matter.
Certainly not you.
Certainly, yes. But it is, I think for many people, this is, that this is a psychological force.
Okay, I want to throw a word at you both, because it's a word that I think a lot about, and I think it could be rescued from religion. It's been sort of hijacked by religion, and every time a scientist uses the S word, it's not doing anything, the S word, people go, really? And the word is spirituality. And I think spirituality is a wonderful word, because it really, if you think about it, it comes from inspire, aspire. It's about the breathing of the world into yourself to expand who you are. And so when we talk about spirits, spirituality, they're completely different things, to me anyways. And I just wanted to know what your take on this is, the idea that science and spirituality are much closer than people may think. Alan has, because I know his book, he talks a lot about this, so sort of like,
Well, first of all, I think that the spirituality may or may not involve an all-powerful creator.
Right.
But I think that, to me, spirituality is very connected with the transcendent experience. That it's the feeling of being connected to something larger than ourselves. That there are eternal values. There are things that we believe in. I think beauty, for me, beauty is part of the spiritual world. And I don't see any contradiction between the notion of spirituality and the enterprise of science.
So that experience you had in that boat, would you call that a spiritual experience?
Yes, I would.
Okay. So about you, now I put you on the spot. Have you
no,
ever
not at
had
all.
something like
I don't know. I mean, this spirituality. I mean, if it makes a claim, an ontological claim to spirits, that's I'm not interested. But yes, the notion of transcendence, of being carried away beyond yourself, that we are capable of. The word, ancient Greek word, ecstasy, ecstasis, to stand beside what? To stand beside yourself. This is this is an experience. The Greeks knew about it, and Plato writes about it. This being drawn out by yourself by something awesome that can also, at its best, give you the feeling of gratitude, gratitude for existence. So, in that sense, yes, science can be the source. Mathematics, science, art can be the source of this spirituality, of ecstasy, of transcendence. You know that we couldn't get through a session without my talking about Spinoza. Spinoza is very relevant here because Spinoza, 17th century philosopher who was excommunicated by his Jewish community of Amsterdam, and therefore is my favorite philosopher, was accused of being an atheist, but also of being God intoxicated. The poet novelist called him God intoxicated, and what it was it was a kind of transcendent experience. Spinoza was the first to have a sense that the universe itself might explain itself. That were we to know the final theory of everything, which he thinks we can't know, but he thinks must exist. There must be a way that the universe could explain itself, and in that way abolish all arbitrariness and contingency from the universe. But just to contemplate that the universe is the kind of thing that could explain itself, even though we can't get to the explanation, just is so awesome and makes one feel so grateful to be one of the little implications, for as short as that will last, of this universe, that it was a kind of religion. It was a kind of natural piety. And Einstein, whenever he was asked about whether he believed in God, he would say, I believe in Spinoza's God, which is a very tricky way of saying, I don't believe in a God outside of the universe. I believe in the universe.
Yeah.
And that's a kind of spirituality.
Absolutely, yeah.
Well, Einstein had a very modest view of our understanding of God and his understanding of God. And he said that any thinking person should not rule out the possibility of God. And he said that we are like children coming into a vast library and seeing all of these books and not understanding them, but knowing that something wrote those books, some intelligence wrote those books. And that is what he said when he was asked about his view of God.
So that's his belief in a rational, lawful universe.
It's his belief in a rational, lawful universe. He said the idea of an anthropomorphic God who actually cares about us is childish.
Yeah. But it also suggests...
It's a Spinoza's God
right,
he's talking about.
But I think his statement there also suggests that there are mysteries that are beyond our grasp. So that's not in contradiction with the statement that it's a lawful universe.
Absolutely. And again, this is the Spinozist view that there is a final theory of everything, but it would take an infinite mind to be able to know it all. So it's out there, and we can prove that final theory is out there, but we can never grasp it ourselves. We can never apprehend it ourselves.
Well, we would never know whether we had the final theory.
We would. If we had it, we would know it because we would be able to prove it was the only, this is Spinoza, it is the only possible universe. All others would be ruled out. It would explain its own existence.
But you could never be sure that there wouldn't be some phenomena that you would observe tomorrow that would be unexplainable by that theory that
So that's the scientist speaking, but I think the philosopher is talking about this something which is beyond. So I wrote a whole book called The Island of Knowledge, which is exactly about this, you know, that the fact that there is no way you can actually get to a final theory of everything because you'll never know where you are in the big scheme of
That
things.
is actually a proof that we never can get to it. I mean, that
Right.
but you can be sure
Right.
that it's there. That's a kind of
Isn't that what's so frustrating about the human condition is that we have this spark of divinity, but it's just a spark. We can't really grasp the whole thing. You know, there is like these glimpses of going deep into something. Yes, you know, is it the theory of everything? It could be. It smells like it, but and then bam, no, there's a new particle. Everything is ruined. Got to start again. And I think that's the.
If we really had it,
Then you'll know.
there we would know. There would be nothing arbitrary
Right,
about it.
exactly.
Right. And right. And our science is filled with things that are arbitrary. It's that way because it's that way, but we don't know why.
I call it monotheistic science.
You call
know,
it what?
Monotheistic science, to get to the theory of everything. And, you know, Steven Weinberg, this wonderful physicist,
Yeah.
right, wrote a book called Dreams of a Final Theory,
Yeah.
where he's, you know, at the time, I'm not sure he does this anymore, but at the time he truly believed, you know, that was, we're getting there, right? In fact, there are lots of our colleagues that believe that, right? We're almost there, 4 forces, superstrings, etc. We're going to do it, and you just can't do it. You know, you cannot, even if you do get superstrings and all this beautiful stuff, you cannot know that, you know, the day after tomorrow.
We know that we don't know.
Yeah.
We know that we don't know.
Well, no, a lot of people.
It's you know, it's amazing to me. It's not amazing that we don't know everything. It's amazing that we know anything.
Right.
Yeah.
Good.
Yes.
Einstein also said something about the most amazing thing about the universe, that it's comprehensible, right?
That's extraordinary. We evolved apes, and it's you know, it's a kind of humility that we realize that the intuitions that we bring to bear are not infallible.
All right. So, do you have any questions to one another you'd like to take on before we move on to questions from our friends?
Okay.
You go. Girl.
One little thing. I don't like using the word faith when it comes to our belief that nature is nomological, is law-like. First of all, it's a condition of our being here at all. I mean, life could not exist unless we were, you know, nature were law-like. It's true that we can prove it. We can prove, you know, this is Hume, David Hume, great 18th century Scottish philosopher, wasn't excommunicated, but he's still a very good philosopher. He, you know, he's the one who had, you know, proved conclusively that there's no way to justify what he called the uniformity of nature, that the laws of nature won't simply change. And there's no way to do it because you can't do it through pure logic, because if you can conceive of its change and it's not a violation of logic, and you can't prove it through inductive reasoning, because that would be circular. Inductive reasoning presumes that, what are we going to say, nature's always been uniform, so it's going to continue to be. That would be using the very principle that we want to prove. Yes, there's no way that we can justify, just as there's no way that we can justify logic itself. But it's a condition of reason. We can't make sense of the world at all. Unless we buy into it.
Well, I don't agree with that. I mean, it could be that the world is 99.99% logical, and it's logical enough and lawful enough for us to exist. Like there's some interactions with elementary particles that only where a certain symmetry is violated, only 1 out of every billion interactions. And it could be that all of the biology that produces us lives happily in that 99.99% of the world that is lawful.
Well, some laws are probabilistic, not all laws have to be, absolute. So that there are, probabilistic laws. Those are sometimes violated. That's in the nature of probabilistic laws. But that's not a violation of the law.
No.
Because the law itself
No.
is a probabilistic law. So it's just, I feel that when we use the word faith for that sort of thing, this condition of doing science, but of just making sense at all. I mean, pursuing our lives. To use that word, faith makes it sound like there's a false equivalence between a kind of faith that is, part of just pursuing rationality, and faith as it's usually used, which is,
Religious
I want the world to be this way very, very much, and
Right.
therefore it is.
Yeah, exactly.
Yes.
Right. So, on that note, and this is pertinent to this question, it's a question for Alan, but it really is for all of us. So you mentioned that a universe without laws would be a frightening place, but a universe with laws like ours can also be frightening. Look at the hurricanes. Are there any scientific truths or fields of scientific inquiry that threaten your sensibilities as a humanist?
Is that a question?
Yes, a question. Are there any scientific truths or fields of scientific inquiry that threaten your sensibilities as a humanist? I know one, but I'll be quiet for now.
I can't think of any. I'm sorry, I'm not able to come up
Okay,
with.
so what about...
What about entropy?
No, I mean, I was thinking about in terms of fields, entropy sucks really, but,
Yeah.
but but I was thinking more in terms of fields of scientific inquiry. I was thinking about transhumanism.
Well, there's plenty of fields of scientific inquiry that have emotional resonance with me.
That's, yeah.
Just the neuroscience and the exploration of what thinking is. The question of the Big Bang and whether something came before the Big Bang. These are certainly issues that affect me in my gut. But I don't feel threatened. Maybe I am putting too much emphasis on your word threatened.
His
yeah.
word or her word.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So what do you
I was thinking of transhumanism because, transhumanism being the idea that we are in the process of becoming something else, a different kind of species altogether because of our coexistence and symbiotic relationship with digital technology, right? So for example, picture you go out to work one day and you're stuck in traffic and you realize you forgot your cell phone at home. And you can't go back because otherwise you'll get late to work. So you have to spend a whole day without a cell phone. It's desperation for people because the cell phone is part of you. It becomes an extension of your person. And so you're not yourself without it anymore because you need it so badly, right? And in fact, if you look at people's different cell phones, you're going to see that there'll be lots of apps which are overlapping, the same, but some of them are going to be very particular to you and to your tastes as a person, almost like a fingerprint, because it really is an extension of you through a machine. So the transhumanism movement goes way beyond that, and I'm sure you've seen in sci-fi movies where we actually will become machines, right, in the sense that we will expand our neural capacities and physical strength and possibly longevity to a point that will be almost irrecognizable as humans. It'll be something different. So that is...
Oh, I see. Okay. Well, that does.
If you're talking about technology rather than laws of nature here, there are lots of things.
Yeah, well, fields of scientific inquiry.
Designer babies, right?
Right.
CRISPR.
Yeah.
Designing your...
Yeah.
that's I think that's a really
That should be a
frightening.
nice next dialogue, honestly.
Yeah.
It's a good one.
I think the smartphones that we have right now threaten me as a human being. Because
He's very
everybody's
resistant
plugged
to
in.
email, by the way. So he's resisting the onslaught, which is very bravely. So there is one here that says, do you think that a transcendent experience could come from someone, or to someone who had never heard of God, spirit, or religion? And if so, how might that experience differ from someone raised in a traditional Western society? So there's some sort of universality to the transcendent experience, which does not need the baggage that.
I think definitely.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. Once I was at Cape of Good Hope, and staring out into the ocean, and a magnificent sight, perfect rainbow formed right out there in the ocean, and I was staring, having a transcendent experience. And then I looked in front of me, and there was a line of baboons, and they were all facing, and baboons are, if you've ever spent time, they're very noisy, complete silence, and they were all staring at it.
Wow.
And I thought, transcendence.
Yeah, that's awesome. So
But do they believe in God?
maybe the rainbow was God for them. Okay. Okay, this one. So, given recent theories regarding the nature of matter, is there speculation that individuals may contain information in the form of memory of lives and events that occurred in previous eras? That is to say, could there be an energetic form of DNA, in quotes, that is held in the relational elements of matter / energy in the body, a sort of atomic memory, so to speak? So, lots of Tibetan Buddhists believe in things like that. And so this would be sort of like, I guess, a theory of reincarnation, or, of some sort of, I don't know what you think of all this, both of you. That's a question from the audience.
You want to take that, Rebecca?
I have no experience with these sorts of things. I know that it's reported sometimes, these anomalous events, children born seeming to remember things. And, if I were convinced that this was really an experience, that would be a possible explanation that was offered there. But no, I really have nothing intelligent to say, as I've just demonstrated.
Alan is completely silent. Okay, so I have one more final question, maybe, or idea to discuss, which is this notion of supernatural versus natural, right? To me, and I just want to know what you think of this, supernatural things don't really make a lot of sense for the following reason. Let's imagine that I'm in my bedroom and I see a ghost, right? The fact that I saw a ghost means that whatever the entity is, it radiated some form of electromagnetic energy that impacted my eyes and sort of impressed my visual cortex, so I could see it. So it became a natural phenomenon. So to have an experience which is supernatural makes it natural because it involves an exchange of information, right? Which in principle supernatural things should not have because they inhabit a different kind of reality.
But what if you saw the ghost and it was not through electromagnetic radiation? See, that's a term of science.
Okay.
So what if somehow you were able to see the ghost without even with your eyes closed?
So I saw it, okay, that would be different. Yeah. So ghosts, right. So that would be different. If that's possible, then I would probably think it's some sort of hallucination.
Yeah.
Because it would be coming from my head,
Because you're committed to the central doctrine
I'm
of
hearing
science.
voices, it's coming from, I'm seeing things, inside my head. So something must be wrong. Yeah. Do you agree? I mean, do you think, so the idea of supernatural is a complicated one from physical material perspective.
Well, to know what supernatural is, you have to first know what the natural is.
I mean, the boundary.
So this is not to exclude the possibility of supernatural existing, but just the grounds that you could possibly have for thinking that it exists. But usually the grounds that people have for thinking that the supernatural exists is not, well, that's not true. People do have these mystical, well, what about mystical experiences when people
Right.
seem to, have this sense of coming into contact with the numinous, the eternal, something that you can't. Is there anything really incomprehensible? I don't think there's anything incomprehensible
Right.
about
can't
this
think-
idea.
But
It's a different way. I mean, if it were, I mean, I'm skeptical of such experiences. I've actually had experiences that could be described that way, but I have alternative explanations for them. But it's, it could, if, I guess if my chair levitated, I too would not,
Believe in the supernatural.
I would not. But if,
you'd be scared.
I'd be holding on. I think I find it thrilling. But I mean, if suddenly, I walked outside and I looked up at the sky and it was forming a big Jewish star, a big Magen David, all the constellations had changed.
Yeah.
And it was just this big, well, that would give me something to think about.
Yeah, right. But we can wait for that one. I guess.
Yes.
But those experiences, the one you had in the boat, they're very natural. I mean, they're just, these feelings of transcendence are perfectly natural. I remember I had certainly one, maybe more than one experience like that. When I was 15, my brother who's in the audience, we went south of Rio, where I grew up, to these spectacular islands, and I was this sort of very mystical boy, and he said, "You want mystical experiences? Sit on that rock in front of the ocean and watch." And I was there for a very long time, and I could feel precisely this whole sense of material dissociation, of sort of the person disappearing to become a feeling of oneness, right? Which is a wonderful thing, right? So those things happen, but they have nothing to do with supernatural feelings,
Right.
I think. Okay, folks. I think we touched on some of the basics, and I hope that you will, talking about more prosaic things, you have received a little form which, if you want to have more conversations like this one funded by Templeton, I need to show them that people loved us. And so if you could just send me some, fill the surveys as quickly as possible, and they'll be collected. And then hopefully next year we're going to have another one here, also in the fall, probably on the topic of mortality. So we'll see about that. So thank you so much for coming. Really good.
For a more in-depth discussion of the issues raised, we look forward to seeing you there.